I checked the camera footage expecting packages. What I saw instead made me stop the video and not breathe for 5 seconds. Because the delivery driver didn't just drop things off. He was staying inside my house. And my wife wasn't stopping him. It started like any ordinary marriage. I was 38. She was 35. Our days had settled into a rhythm built from repetition, not fire. We both worked long hours that bled into each other until the weeks felt identical. I left before 7 most mornings. She stayed behind in the house, laptop open on the living room table, a half-drunk coffee always beside it. Deliveries came and went without notice. Groceries at 10:45. Work packages at 14:20. Random Amazon boxes in the late afternoon. The doorbell simply became background noise. Then the same van began appearing. Same white panel van with the faded logo on the side. Same driver. Mid-30s, average build, dark cap pulled low. He arrived on Tuesdays and Thursdays like clockwork, always between 11:10 and 11:30, right after I had pulled out of the driveway. At first, I noticed it only in passing. I would see the van from the corner as I drove away, or spot the tracking update on her phone when I checked the joint account later that evening. Nothing unusual. People order things. Drivers have routes. But the timing tightened. One Thursday, I forgot my laptop charger and turned back at 11:05. The van was already parked at the curb. I watched from 2 houses down as he carried a small box to the door. She opened it within seconds. The exchange took longer than it should have. He stood on the step. She held the door half open. 30 seconds became a minute. Then another. I waited until he finally walked back to the van before I drove off again. The next week I left at the usual time but circled the block and parked on the next street. At 11:17 the van appeared. Same driver. He didn't knock immediately. He checked his phone first, then glanced up at the windows. Only after that did he approach the door. She answered quickly. I sat in my car with the engine off and counted. 2 minutes and 40 seconds before he stepped back outside. The box he carried away looked smaller than the one he had brought in. I told myself it was nothing. Routes overlap. Drivers remember regular customers. She worked from home and signed for everything. Logical explanations stacked up neatly. But the pattern refused to stay neat. On the following Tuesday, I left 10 minutes early on purpose. The van was already there at 11:03. I watched him walk up the path carrying nothing visible in his hands. No package. No clipboard. Just the same dark cap and the same measured pace. He reached the door. She opened it. He stepped inside. The door closed behind him. I sat 3 houses away until 11:41. 41 minutes. No delivery scan appeared on the account that day. No notification. When I finally came home that evening, the house smelled faintly of the same cheap cologne I had noticed once before on her shirt collar. She was at her laptop as usual, coffee half finished, typing steadily. Nothing in her posture changed when I walked in. The next morning, I checked the security camera footage I had installed 6 months earlier for package theft. The camera outside the front door had been angled upward sometime during the previous week. It now pointed at the sky. Only the audio remained. I listened anyway. At 11:17, there was the soft sound of the door opening. Then nothing clear for 38 minutes except occasional low movement and the faint creak of the floorboards in the living room. Then the door closed again. The van pulled away at 11:56. I deleted the clip and cleared the history before she woke up. The deliveries kept coming. Always the same van. Always when the house was empty except for her. Always just a little longer than necessary. And every time I left for work, I caught myself checking the rearview mirror longer than I should have, waiting to see if the white van would appear right on schedule. It always did. The first time I noticed it, I brushed it off. She mentioned the driver again that evening while closing her laptop at 19:12. Same one. Really efficient, she said. The words landed flat in the quiet kitchen. I nodded once and kept unloading the dishwasher. But the tone stayed with me. Too casual, too practiced. Like a line she had used before. I waited until she went upstairs to shower at 21:40. Then I opened the shared delivery account on my phone. The logs loaded slowly under the dim counter light. Same driver name appeared 6 times in the last 10 days. Different order numbers. Different companies. All logged between 11:08 and 11:37. All marked as handed to resident. all while my work calendar showed me in meetings across town. I scrolled further. Average delivery time for other couriers hovered at 1 minute 40 seconds. His entries sat at 7 minutes, one at 9. Another at 12 minutes and 14 seconds on a Thursday when the package weighed less than 2 pounds. I closed the app and stared at the black screen for a long minute. The next morning I left at 7:55 as usual. At the first red light I pulled up the tracking on her most recent order. Estimated arrival, 11:15. I drove 2 blocks, then turned into the side street behind our house and killed the engine at 10:58. The white van rolled up at 11:11 exactly. He stepped out carrying a thin envelope. No scanner in his hand. He walked straight to the door without checking the address. She opened it before he reached the top step. He went inside. I timed it on my watch. 8 minutes and 51 seconds. The door opened again at 12:02. He exited first, adjusting his cap. She stood in the doorway a moment longer than necessary, watching him walk back to the van. No envelope visible in his hands when he left. I drove away before he pulled out, heart steady but palms damp on the wheel. At the office I refreshed the account every 20 minutes. The delivery status flipped to completed at 12:04. No photo. No signature captured. That evening she heated leftovers at 18:30 and asked how my day went. I answered in short sentences and watched her move around the kitchen. She seemed lighter on her feet. Hair still slightly damp from an afternoon shower I hadn't known about. Later, while she worked on the couch, I checked the delivery logs once more from the bedroom. A new entry had appeared for the following Tuesday. Same driver. Same estimated window. I deleted the browser history and set my alarm for 6:45. Something in the pattern was tightening, and I still couldn't see the full shape of it. The house felt quieter than usual that night. The kind of quiet that waits for the next move. I didn't say anything at first. I told myself it was nothing. Delays on the route. Extra signatures required. Coincidence piling on coincidence. The white van kept arriving between 11:08 and 11:37, 3 or 4 times a week. I kept my schedule rigid and said nothing when I returned home at 18:50 to find her already closing the laptop, coffee mug rinsed and drying on the counter. But the pattern refused to fade. I started checking the front door camera every evening after she went to bed. At 23:15, I would sit in the dark bedroom with the volume low and scroll through the saved clips. He never rushed. He paused on the step each time. His shoulders shifted as if speaking. Once he tilted his head back and his body shook slightly, the way people do when they laugh at something shared. She stayed in the doorway longer than any delivery needed. 30 seconds. 45. Sometimes over a minute. At first the exchanges looked harmless enough. Then I noticed the packages. He arrived on Wednesday at 11:14 carrying a small padded envelope. When he left at 11:26 the envelope was no longer in his hands. On Friday he brought nothing visible at all. He stepped onto the porch empty-handed at 11:19 and walked back to the van at 11:31 still carrying nothing. The delivery status updated anyway at 11:33. Completed. Handed to resident. I cross-checked timestamps across 7 days. Every visit followed the same window. Every one ran between 7 and 12 minutes. The camera caught the same sequence. Approach, pause, extended exchange, departure. No other couriers behaved this way. Only him. That was when the recordings grew worse. On the Tuesday clip from 11:12, I watched him reach the door with a thin folder. She opened it. He spoke. Then he took one full step inside. The door remained half open, framing them both for 4 seconds. She did not move back. She did not close the gap. He leaned slightly forward. The door finally swung shut at 11:13. It stayed closed until 11:29. I replayed that 4-second moment 6 times. The camera angle caught only their lower bodies and the edge of the door. His right foot crossed the threshold clearly. Hers stayed planted just inside. No hesitation visible in her stance. The motion looked practiced, familiar. I sat on the edge of the bed until 0:40. Phone still in my hand, screen gone dark. The next morning I left at 7:52. The van appeared in my rearview mirror before I even reached the end of the street. Same faded logo. Same driver adjusting his cap as he slowed in front of our house. I kept driving. But the gap between what the footage showed and what I could explain had widened into something I no longer wanted to name. And the house, when I returned that evening at 19.5, smelled faintly of the same cheap cologne again. Only this time a small receipt lay folded on the kitchen counter. No company name, no order number. Just a handwritten time, 11:27, and nothing else. I replayed that footage over and over. I zoomed in until the pixels fractured. I slowed the clip to quarter speed and watched frame by frame as his foot crossed the threshold at 11:13. The door stayed half open for exactly 4 seconds. Her stance never shifted. I stitched together 7 separate recordings from the past 11 days, aligning the timestamps side by side on my laptop screen at 1:20 in the morning. The audio track crackled through the cheap camera mic. Her voice came through clear on 3 different days. Steady. Even. No hesitation. No lowered tone. She spoke the way she spoke to me when she asked about dinner plans or reminded me to pick up milk. Comfortable. Familiar. The kind of rhythm that comes from repetition. She was not talking to a stranger in a uniform. On the Thursday clip at 11:22 her words carried a light laugh at the end. On the Monday clip the cadence matched the way she planned her work calls. Someone who knew the gaps in her schedule. Someone who knew when the house would be empty. Then the phrase surfaced. It appeared in 4 separate visits, spaced across 9 days. Always near the end of the exchange. Same time tomorrow. Delivered flat. Not asked. Not suggested. Simply stated and accepted. The driver's reply was always a short grunt of agreement. Then the door would close. I played those 4 moments back to back at 2:07. The coordination sat there on the screen like a schedule. Tuesday 11:15. Thursday 11:12. Monday 11:19. Friday 11:24. Each visit slotted neatly into the hours I was guaranteed to be gone. Each one ended with the same forward-looking line. This was not random. The packages had become secondary. Some days he arrived with nothing. Other days he left with less than he brought. The delivery app still logged every stop as completed within the expected window. The system accepted the lie without question. I sat in the dark until 3:40, laptop lid finally closed, the faint glow of the streetlight cutting across the bedroom floor. The driver was not delivering parcels anymore. He was moving something else between them. Small items. Words. Plans. Pieces of a second routine that ran parallel to the one I thought we shared. A routine that had learned my exact departure times, my meeting blocks, the precise shape of my absence. And the house, when I finally lay down at 4:15, felt heavier than before. As if the walls had been listening longer than I had. The next morning the white van would arrive again at 11:17. I already knew the exact minute. And this time I would be waiting in a different place entirely. I stopped sleeping properly after that. Nights shrank to fragments. I lay awake until 2:30, then woke at 4:10 with the same 4-second clip looping behind my eyes. Every ordinary detail in the house now carried weight. The half-finished coffee on the table at 10:45. The way she refreshed her email at 11:05. The faint scent that lingered in the hallway by 12:10. I started tracking everything. I kept a plain notebook in the glove compartment. Dates, exact arrival times, duration of each visit, her mood the night before. I noted when she had been quiet at dinner, when she had gone to bed early, when nothing at all had seemed off. The driver's schedule tightened around those entries. He appeared the morning after a tense evening on the 14th. He arrived at 11:16 following a night she had barely spoken at 19:40. On days when the house felt perfectly ordinary, he still came at 11:22 like clockwork. Maintenance visits. Regular checks. The pattern refused to break. I tried to rationalize it in the quiet of my car at 7:55 each morning. Perhaps it was only conversation. Perhaps she needed someone who listened without the weight of years between us. Perhaps I was mapping meaning onto coincidence. The explanations felt thin even as I formed them. Then came the day that ended the rationalizations. I remembered it clearly because I had finished a client call early and driven home at 10:40. I parked 3 streets away and walked the last block on foot, staying out of sight behind the neighbor's hedge. At 11:09, the white van turned the corner. He killed the engine and sat for 20 seconds, checking his phone. Then he stepped out empty-handed. He knocked once at 11:11. She opened the door within 3 seconds. They stood facing each other on the threshold. The look held for 6 full seconds. No parcel changed hands. Instead, he reached into his back pocket and passed her something small, folded, the size of a receipt or a note. She took it without hesitation. Her eyes dropped to the paper. She unfolded it slowly. Then the corners of her mouth lifted. Not polite, not quick. A slow, private curve that stayed on her face as she looked back up at him. He nodded once. She slipped the note into the pocket of her hoodie and stepped back. The door closed at 11:13. He returned to the van at 11:14 and drove away. I stayed behind the hedge until 11:37, breathing shallow against the leaves. No delivery was logged that day. No scan. No update in the account. Yet something had been delivered all the same. A message. A signal. A piece of whatever ran beneath the surface of our ordinary hours. That night she moved around the kitchen at 18:55 the same way she always did. Calm? Routine. The note was nowhere visible. But the house felt different now. Lighter for her, heavier for me. And the next scheduled visit was already marked in my notebook for Thursday at 11:18. I had no idea what the next folded paper would say, or how many had already passed between them before I started watching. I didn't wait anymore. On Thursday at 11:10 I parked in the driveway instead of leaving. I walked straight to the front door and turned the handle at 11:16. The door opened without resistance. He stood on the threshold in his usual cap and faded uniform. Same calm expression. When his eyes met mine there was no flinch, no sudden step back, no scramble for an excuse. He simply held my gaze for 3 full seconds, as if I had arrived at the wrong time in a meeting already in progress. She froze in the hallway behind him. Her shoulders stiffened for exactly 1 second. Then her posture settled again into something almost resigned. He did not move. His hands stayed at his sides. No package. No envelope this time. Just the faint smell of engine oil and that same cheap cologne, drifting past me into the house. I stood there between them, the question forming in the silence that stretched from 11:17 to 11:19. She finally spoke first. Her voice stayed even, almost gentle in its clarity. The words landed like facts already decided long ago. The driver remained motionless. His expression did not change. He looked at me the way someone looks at a latecomer who has interrupted an established routine. Then she continued. The sentence came out measured, without rush. They were not deliveries. The word hung in the narrow space of the doorway. She added the next part without pause, as if explaining a simple system to a child. Reminders. He spoke then for the first time in my presence. His tone stayed low and controlled, the voice of someone who had said the same thing before in other houses, other situations. Secrets did not stay inside walls. They needed movement. They needed a system to survive. She added the final piece without looking away from me. Her hands stayed relaxed at her sides. He helped her keep her 2 lives from collapsing into each other. The phrase settled over the 3 of us like a new frame around the entire house. 2 separate structures running on the same floors, the same hours, the same coffee mug left half-finished on the living room table. 1 life visible every evening at 19:05 when I walked through the door. Another life moving quietly between 11:12 and 11:29 on scheduled weekdays, carried in folded notes and timed absences. I stood there until 11:23, the cool air from outside pressing against my back. He finally stepped past me at 11:24 without another word. His shoulder brushed mine lightly. The van started at 11:25 and pulled away down the street at normal speed. She remained in the hallway. The door stayed open behind me. The house felt suddenly larger, as if entire rooms had been added while I was still trying to understand the ones I thought I knew. And somewhere in the quiet that followed, the question of how many reminders had already passed through these walls remained unanswered. How long the second life had been running on its own precise schedule, and what else it had been keeping stable all this time. The driver left without another word. He simply turned at 11:24, walked back to the white van, and drove away at normal speed. No glance over his shoulder. No change in posture. The faded logo disappeared around the corner at 11:26 exactly as if the morning had followed its usual script. She stayed in the hallway. She did not follow him outside. She did not close the door immediately. She stood there for another 40 seconds, hands loose at her sides, breathing steady. Then she turned and walked into the living room without looking at me. That night at 20:15 she sat on the edge of the couch while I remained standing near the kitchen counter. She spoke in even sentences, each one measured and complete. No raised voice. No tears. No attempt to soften the edges. She laid out the shape of what had been running alongside our marriage for longer than I had noticed. It was not an apology. It was a quiet accounting of compartments. Separate routines. Separate needs. A second set of hours that existed in the gaps I had stopped examining years ago. She described it the way someone might describe a second job that paid in peace rather than money. The driver was never the secret itself. He was only the infrastructure. The reliable link that moved small notes, small objects, small confirmations between the two worlds without ever entering either one fully. He arrived on schedule because the schedule protected both sides. He left on schedule because the schedule kept everything contained. I listened until 21:40. She finished speaking, stood up, and carried her empty glass to the sink. She rinsed it carefully, placed it on the drying rack, and went upstairs at 21:52. I remained downstairs until 23:10. The notebook I had kept in the glove compartment now felt useless. The timestamps, the durations, the patterns I had recorded so obsessively were only the visible tracks of something larger. The real system had never been the deliveries. The real system had been the quiet agreement that let her move between versions of herself without collision. At 0:35, I walked through the house turning off lights. In the living room, the laptop sat closed on the table. Next to it lay the half-finished coffee mug from earlier that day. The faint ring of dried liquid marked the exact time she had set it down. Somewhere in the walls, the second life continued its own rhythm, undisturbed by what had happened at 11:16. The infrastructure remained intact. The driver would return on his next scheduled day, cap low, steps measured, ready to carry whatever small piece kept the compartments from touching. And I understood now that the house had been divided long before I ever started watching the camera. The only question left was how many other routines had been running silently in the same rooms, using the same hours, breathing the same air I had believed belonged only to us. I used to think secrets were hidden in obvious places. Messages, phones, locked doors. But I learned something else. The most dangerous secrets aren't hidden. They're scheduled. They arrive at the same time every day. They ring the same doorbell. They smile at you while you believe everything is normal. And the scariest part? You don't notice them. Because they look like routine.